Family are devastated by the loss of Hannah. My wife and I have lost our beautiful daughter, and Hannah's sister Sarah has lost her big sister and friend.
Hannah Foster was born on August 31, 1985, in Southampton, England. She was the eldest daughter of Hilary and Trevor Foster and grew up with her little sister, Sarah. From an early age, it became evident that Hannah possessed a remarkable intellect and a passion for learning. Academic excellence seemed to come naturally to her, which suited well with her dream of becoming a doctor. Yet despite her academic pursuits, Hannah maintained a harmonious life, skillfully balancing studies and leisure. On March 14, 2003, she decided to spend her Friday evening with her friend, Helen, at a nearby pub. She was in a great mood that day, even remarking to her mother how excited she was for Sarah to grow up so they could enjoy a night out together. Before leaving their house, Hannah smiled and waved at her mother and sister, telling them she would see them later. Sadly, this would be their final moment together. That evening, Hannah and Helen explored the Hobbit pub and ventured to the nearby Sobar Southampton nightclub. With their other friends not showing up, the two eventually decided to call it a night. At around 10:50 p.m., they wrapped up their evening and headed home. Hannah walked Helen to a bus stop on Portswood Road. After ensuring her friends safely boarded the bus, Hannah started her short half-mile walk home. Little did she know, danger was lurking nearby. A man inside a van was watching Hannah from afar. He waited for her to walk by his vehicle. Then, when she was close enough, he popped out of the van. With much force, he grabbed her by the neck and dragged her inside the vehicle. Although she tried to resist, she didn't stand a chance against the much larger man. He then began driving with her trapped inside. Whenever Hannah was out late, she would contact her parents. However, on that particular evening, they didn't receive any call or text from her. By around 5 a.m. the following morning, her mom, Hilary, woke up to find Hannah's room empty. This made her worry. She and her husband frantically tried contacting their daughter all morning. Her phone was ringing, but there was no answer. At around 10:30 a.m., when they still couldn't get a response, Hannah's dad decided to call the police for help. Officers then went house to house to inquire about Hannah, but to no avail. They tried to call her phone and realized it was still switched on, emitting signals to nearby cell sites. These signals allowed them to map the location of Hannah's phone. They deduced that the phone was inside a vehicle traveling between Southampton and Portsmouth that Saturday morning, March 15th. Moreover, the police successfully traced Hannah's previous phone calls. In a startling development, they discovered she called the emergency hotline on the night of her disappearance. Unfortunately, Hannah couldn't verbally express her concerns with the operator. Because of the lack of direct communication and the indistinct voices, the call was treated as a likely misdial. Investigators then enhanced the 58-second-long recording, hoping to find some clues. That's when it dawned on them that something terribly wrong must have happened to the missing woman.
From the sound of the recording, it did appear as though Hannah was certainly in a vehicle, and perhaps a larger vehicle, a van-type vehicle. It was clear that we were dealing with a male who didn't have English as his first language, and it would appear the most likely ethnicity of the person would have been Asian.
The recorded voice belonged to a man with a pronounced Indian accent. He spoke in an intimidating tone, instructing Hannah to crouch down to avoid being seen by anyone outside. It was also apparent by the sounds that she was terrified at that moment. Police officers began to worry that they might not get Hannah back alive. Unfortunately, their worst fears soon materialized. In the afternoon of March 15th, local authorities responded to a report from a concerned motorist who found a bruised and battered body of a woman on Allington Lane in Southampton. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed what they had been dreading, that woman was indeed Hannah. Evidence strongly suggested that she had been subjected to horrific acts by her assailant before she was killed. Upon viewing Hannah's lifeless body in the mortuary, her parents were overcome with profound grief. They tenderly held her hand and vowed to do everything to ensure justice for her. Within 24 hours of the discovery of Hannah's body, investigators were also able to retrieve her coat and her bag, which had her phone that was still on. Recovering her belongings became crucial in piecing together the timeline and circumstances surrounding this gruesome crime. Soon enough, forensics obtained a male DNA profile from Hannah's bloodied coat. However, they couldn't find a match when they cross-referenced it with the National DNA Database. A Around this time, Trevor and Hilary Foster also released a statement in a press conference, pleading for help from the locals in resolving the case.
We as a family are devastated by the loss of Hannah. My wife and I have lost our beautiful daughter, and Hannah's sister Sarah has lost her big sister and friend. Please help us.
Moved by the grieving parents' words, the community rallied in support. Before long, the entire port city became filled with billboards and posters featuring Hannah's image as everyone joined forces to track down the killer. Meanwhile, investigators began reviewing CCTV footage to look for van-type vehicles that followed the routes on Hannah's phone. This led to the identification of 7 vans that potentially matched the route taken during the incident. The local authorities then released this info to the public. While watching the news regarding these 7 vehicles, a supervisor at Hazelwood Foods made a crucial connection. He recognized one of the vehicles that belonged to their company. He also recalled the van's driver arriving for work on March 15th with a noticeable scratch on his face. Furthermore, the driver was also unable to finish his shift that day. These red flags prompted the supervisor to report the driver to the police as a possible suspect. His name was Maninder Pal Singh Kohli. Kohli was born and raised in Punjab, India. Wanting to escape poverty, he agreed to an arranged marriage with a British citizen named Shalinda in 1993. This allowed him to stay in the UK, where he found work as a sandwich delivery driver. He and his wife eventually had 2 children. Though he maintained good relationships with family and friends, there existed a darker, more sinister aspect to his personality. He grappled with heavy drinking and excessive gambling. Moreover, he also enjoyed engaging with ladies for hire. His ability to maintain a facade allowed him to lead a double life that remained hidden from his unsuspecting wife. On March 14, 2003, Kohli was with his wife early in the evening. Then he went out to one of the pubs in the local area to have a drink. The place he visited was located just a few hundred yards from where Hannah and her friend hung out. Kohli then left the pub before closing time, coinciding with the departure of Hannah and her friend from their bar. It was at this moment that he spotted his eventual victim, setting the tragic events of that night into motion. When the investigators received the report from Kohli's supervisor, they went to inspect the van. Inside the vehicle, they found hair and blood belonging to Hannah. Kohli's DNA was also on the seat. When forensics analyzed it, it matched the DNA profile found on Hannah's jacket. The police officers also retraced the van's route via CCTV. Footage showed this particular van driving along the area where Hannah was on the night of her abduction. Furthermore, the vehicle had a refrigerator unit on top of it, the noise of which can be heard from Hannah's emergency call. In a separate footage, the van was also seen passing a gas station near the spot where Hannah's body was discovered. The timestamp indicated that this happened at approximately 3:15 a.m. on March 15th. Additionally, another footage showed the van within the vicinity where Hannah's phone eventually stopped moving. As the incriminating evidence against Kohli piled up, police officers moved to arrest him. This was less than 2 weeks after the crime. However, when they went to his house, it was empty. Still, they were able to track down his wife, Shalinda, who was in her parents' home. When interviewed, she mentioned that her husband traveled back to India on March 18th to visit his ailing mother. Upon Kohli's arrival in his hometown of Punjab, his father was surprised to see him. According to neighbors, Kohli spent most of his time inside his parents' house, rarely venturing outside. A week later, his brother, Ishpreet, discovered the real reason why Kohli came back to India. There was an active arrest warrant against him in Southampton. Nonetheless, Ishpreet remained skeptical of the charges leveled against his brother. Now aware that the British police were after him, Kohli decided to shave his head and his beard to forge a new identity. He then left his parents' home and moved from place to place in India. Meanwhile, back in the UK, his wife made a puzzling confession to the police in another interview. Shalinda admitted that it was indeed her husband driving the van and that he went to a local pub to drink on March 14th. She also affirmed the presence of scratches on his face when he returned home the next day. However, despite these admissions, she adamantly maintained her husband's innocence. She claimed that her husband told her that someone had entered his van and placed a lifeless body inside while he was at the pub, and the reason he drove around in the wee hours of March 15th was so he could find a place to dump the body. Sensing that she was lying, the police officers moved to arrest her. However, she was freed shortly after without charges. The Southampton detectives then decided to shift their focus on tracking down Kohli in India. a country with over 1 billion residents. India is a vast country with a vast population, and on the face of it, it was the proverbial needle in a haystack. Adding to the British detectives' challenges was the lack of cooperation from local authorities. When they arrived in India, local officials denied them access to Punjab. This prevented them from interviewing Kohli's family to ask for his whereabouts. Additionally, some Indian police officers suggested that Kohli might have already taken his own life, making the task of tracking his body nearly impossible. The Indian police force also already had their hands full, dealing with all sorts of heinous crimes daily. Hence, while they were sympathetic to the cause of the British investigators, helping them wasn't a priority. At this point, the British investigators began worrying that they might never find Kohli. After leaving Punjab, Kohli made it all the way to the West Bengal city of Darjeeling, which is close to the Nepal border. Upon arrival, Kohli assumed the name Mike Dennis to hide his identity. Here, he met and befriended a cab driver named Jason Lepcha. Kohli told his new friend he was a delivery man in the UK and had family back there. Moreover, he said he was only out in India for vacation. Months later, the Indian authorities changed their stance and allowed the British investigators access to Punjab. But when Southampton officers interviewed Kohli's father, he denied knowing where his son was. He also swore that he wasn't protecting him. "I say if he has committed this crime, hang him. I will be the last person to protect him. If he has done this grave crime, he should be punished and he should face the music. He should face the consequences." As Kohli's parents remained unaware of his whereabouts and with no leads in sight, British investigators devised a strategic plan. They sent out an offer of 5 million rupees to anyone who could provide information on Kohli's location. They hoped this life-changing amount would incentivize people to participate in the search. Meanwhile, Kohli continued to move around to avoid arrest. This time, he settled in the small town of Kalimpong. He joined the Red Cross group there, presenting himself as a member of the World Health Organization. Soon, even the locals believed he was a doctor, and he successfully endeared himself to the community, growing confident that he'd be able to evade authorities. He even got a new wife around this time. 6 months after the British investigators issued a reward for Kohli's info, no one had stepped forward with crucial details. Desperate to obtain justice for their daughter, Hannah's parents eventually flew to India. They went there to raise awareness about their daughter's case. They also appealed to the entire nation of 1.2 billion to help them find the perpetrator. She didn't deserve to die so young in such a callous and terrifying manner. Her killer must be brought to justice. Like in Southampton, the couple's plea struck a chord with the Indian natives. Soon, the local media increased their coverage of Hannah's case. By now, even the remotest parts of the country started learning about Kohli and his heinous crime in the UK. One of Kohli's new friends, Jason Lepcha, saw the news and began connecting the dots. He eventually figured out that the man he knew as Mike Dennis was likely the killer. Maninder Pal Singh Kohli. "As soon as I saw him, I started to feel in myself I knew this guy." He and a few others reported Kohli's whereabouts to the local authorities. Realizing that the police officers were closing in on him, Kohli and his new wife decided to head to her family's home, located 30 minutes from the Nepalese border. Kohli's endgame was to eventually move to Nepal since that country has no extradition agreement with the UK. Staying there meant he would likely escape the consequences of his grisly crime. Fortunately, a tip reached the West Bengal police, revealing Kohli's intended destination. They then alerted the local police force near the Nepalese border, informing them about Kohli's plan to escape. Acting on this tip, the local unit visited the family house of Kohli's wife. But by then, Kohli had already left and was in a bus station for Nepal, racing to catch the murderer before he left India for good. The local unit decided to contact an off-duty officer who was near the bus station. They gave him a description of Kohli and asked him to look out for the fugitive. That officer eventually spotted Kohli and stopped him just in time before he took the bus ride to Nepal. Soon, other police officers arrived. And finally, 16 months after the murder of Hannah Foster, Maninder Kohli was arrested. It was a relief for everyone involved in the case. Hannah's parents were still in India during the arrest and were overjoyed with this development. While he did his best to escape this crime, Kohli was surprisingly forthcoming with his interview with the media immediately after his arrest. "I clearly did a crime over there. That's why I ran from there to come to India. I abducted, raped, and killed Hannah Foster." This confession was prompted due to Kohli growing tired of hiding for months. During his admission, he also disclosed the unsettling details of how he tracked Hannah, abducted her, and subjected her to horrifying acts. However, in a surprising twist, Coley would change his story just days later, vehemently denying any involvement in the crime. His own family also insisted on his innocence, contending that he was unfairly targeted merely because of his Indian heritage. The British authorities then began working on extraditing him to the UK. This posed a unique legal challenge, as extraditing an Indian national to the UK had never happened before. Coley and his legal team also fiercely fought against the extradition process. The killer persistently clung to his false narrative while his lawyers employed various legal tactics to delay proceedings and block his return to the UK. To make matters worse for the Foster family, Hannah's mother, Hilary, was dealing with cancer by this time. Yet, despite her struggles, she was able to summon remarkable strength and courage. In an emotional plea, Hilary wrote a heartfelt letter directly to Coley, urging him to stop resisting his extradition. "I'm pleading as Hannah's mother. It's no way an angry letter. There's no hate, no anger. It's just my feelings. I'm just saying if he's innocent, he needs to clear his name. And the only way he can do that is to stop fighting the extradition." After over 100 court hearings spanning 3 years since Coley's arrest, an Indian judge ultimately approved the British authorities' request for extradition. In the summer of 2007, British police officers traveled to India to facilitate Coley's return to the UK. By July 28, 2007, Maninder Coley was back in England. In October 2008, Coley's trial commenced at Winchester Town Court. For 6 weeks, he maintained his innocence, refusing to acknowledge any responsibility for the crime. Yet despite his unwavering denial, the trial presented overwhelming evidence against him. On November 25, 2008, at the age of 41, Coley was convicted on all charges. Time for closure for the family of British teenager Hannah Foster, who was raped and murdered 5 years ago. The Indian taxi driver, Maninder Pal Singh Coley, accused of raping and murdering her, was sentenced to 24 years in jail in the UK court. Half a decade following her tragic death, justice was finally served for Hannah Foster. In tribute to her memory, Jason Lepcha, the taxi driver who provided crucial information about Coley, utilized his monetary reward to establish a learning center for the less fortunate, named the Hannah Memorial Academy. This school aims to provide educational opportunities for some of India's most underprivileged children. As for the Foster family, Coley's conviction was a bittersweet moment. They expressed disappointment at the sentence, believing that Coley deserved to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Nonetheless, they found peace in the fact that the legal process had run its course, and the memory of their beloved daughter, Hannah, could now be honored without the uncertainty of unresolved justice. "We waited 6 years for this moment and were physically and emotionally exhausted. He's taken every opportunity to delay and pervert the course of justice. Today, finally, justice has caught up with him."